Hi guys, my name is JJacobs. I do go by my middle name Travis, and I'm currently a sophomore here at Grand Canyon University. I am studying biology for secondary education, and with that, I plan to teach high school, whether it be human anatomy, biology, chemistry, microbiology, anything under that wing of science. I just do know for a fact that I plan to be in a secondary class, high school or junior high. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about three things. The first one is going to be what incorporating the history of science looks like in a science classroom and how we as future educators can plan to do that. I'm also going to be talking about specific tactics that we can use in order to incorporate those into our classrooms. And lastly, I'm going to weigh out and kind of just compare and contrast Christianity and science, whether that be in a classroom setting, a research setting, or in the medical field. So to start off, I'm going to talk about the history and why knowing the history is important. So let's take, for example, Gregor Mendel and the pea plant experiment. So Gregor Mendel studied these pea plants in order to determine the process of genetics and how traits are passed down. So incorporating the history of science into this might look something like knowing where Gregor Mendel was from, or why he was studying pea plants, and just kind of getting background knowledge so that the students can better understand this process, and it might help to just round out their learning experience. So another example of this could be seen in the periodic table and the experimentation that went into that and who basically set the foundation for this. So coming into this, you come into contact with something called a paradigm. And a paradigm is basically a set pattern in science, and we can defer that from just common phenomenons that we see throughout science daily, and that can just help to set the research base for scientists to do research further on. So we're going to look at a paradigm shift and how that can play into science as well. So basically, a paradigm shift is something that changes over time. And we can use this to better understand what a scientific revolution is. So a scientific revolution is a huge change or a huge discovery that has gone down in science. And we look at things such as Gregor Mendel's discovery of genetics or the solar system study. We look at things like that as a scientific revolution because, one, those scientists were known as revolutionists, and they were also recognized by other philosophers, historians, and scientists that did recognize this as a scientific revolution. So that's kind of how we can apply the history and everything that sets the basis for the study of science into our classrooms. So generally speaking, as a secondary educator, I plan to incorporate this into my classroom by maybe giving a few background slides before doing a full science lesson. So if I were doing Gregor Mendel's study of genetics, I could talk about that he was a monk and he was born into the Austrian Empire in 1822, I want to say. And I can just give this background information in order to talk about, like, why was Gregor Mendel studying these pea plants in a monastery and garden? And that can kind of help my students just become like into terms with this knowledge and help them do better on exams in prior testing. So now I'm going to be talking about how specifically Christianity and religion can play into science. So I think personally, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and I do just think it's important that if given the opportunity to incorporate Christianity and God into your scientific lessons, it can really help to round out the lesson as a whole. So this depends and is, it's just very controversial, but it depends on if you're in a public or a private school. So if you're in a private school, you are able to incorporate this type of religion into your classroom. Whereas if you're in a public school, it is a lot harder to get into that stuff during academic hours. So just an example of how these kind of maybe contradict or play into each other is the topic of evolution. So oftentimes, the concept of evolution is brought about as, you know, humans evolved from something else, like you guys know Darwin's theory of evolution. Whereas, yes, that is very controversial in terms of Christianity. Let's look at like microevolution. And microevolution is something that is very true because humans are being evolved constantly, whether that be traits or genetics, and it's being passed down the line, and that's based off of natural selection. So that's just one way that Christianity, they don't necessarily play hand in hand, but they do incorporate each other. And I do plan, if given the opportunity, to incorporate Christianity into my classroom. So I just want to thank you for listening today, and I hope you gained a little bit more knowledge about paradigm shifts, history, and involving Christianity in your scientific classroom.